Why is that old Leech here? We don't have room. Those words from my own daughter-in-law rang out like a knife straight to my heart, right on the doorstep of the home I'd poured my sweat and tears into building. My name is Judith Miller. I'm a 72-year-old retired history teacher, and this was my house in the Outer Banks, North Carolina, a place I had spent a lifetime nurturing. They thought I was some senile old woman, easy to push aside and toss out like an old piece of furniture, but they were dead wrong. So stick with me and I'll tell you how I set the perfect trap and brought the curtain down on their own treacherous play. They say old age brings wisdom. I think it brings clarity. Everything becomes as clear as a lake in autumn, and that includes the venomous snakes hiding at the bottom. You see right through the flowery lies, the fake smiles, and the schemes disguised as love. My story doesn't start on the day I was kicked out of my own home. No, it started 3 weeks earlier, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon with a forgotten iPad. It was a beautiful, sunny day in Raleigh, the kind of honey gold sunshine you only get in North Carolina. I had driven over to my son Daniel's place to surprise my 2 grandkids, Liam and Sophie. I've always loved unplanned visits. They feel more natural, not forced. I brought a basket of the oatmeal cookies the kids adore, and the smell of cinnamon and raisins filled the car, a simple scent of love. When I got there, my son Dan and my daughter-in-law Kimberly were both at work. It was just the babysitter and my 2 little angels at home. After all the hugs and kisses and joyful squeals, after the kids had devoured half the cookie basket, I had the idea to play a game with them on the iPad. Liam, the older one, pointed to his mother's iPad sitting on the coffee table in the living room. "Grandma, Mommy Kim uses this one," he said, all innocent-like. I smiled, ruffled his hair, and picked up the tablet. I had no intention of prying, God is my witness. My only goal was to find that Angry Birds game Liam loved so much. The boy had a blast playing a few rounds, the sound of zipping rubber band birds and popping green pigs filling the air with cheer. But then, after losing a level, he got frustrated and slammed his finger on the home button to exit. And that's when my world came crashing down. The screen didn't go back to the homepage with all the game icons. It opened to the Notes app, the last page Kimberly had been using. And the words on that screen made the blood in my veins run cold.
I glanced over at the children. They were busy with their Legos. I took a deep breath and read. It wasn't just a grocery list. It was a cruel narrative, a script written for my downfall. Every single word wove together a perfect conspiracy. The plan was to begin with a sophisticated drama titled Family Reunion. They would invite me to their house in Raleigh for Thanksgiving, promising a cozy holiday. But when I arrived, the house wouldn't have the feel of a family gathering. Instead, it would be formally and coldly decorated. They would greet me at the door with fake expressions of shock and concern. Kimberly would say, her voice dripping with phony sympathy, "Oh, Mom, I thought we agreed on next week. We have a very important meeting with Dad's business partners today, and all of my family is here to help Daniel." They would paint a disastrous picture. If I had arrived just a little later, my mistaken appearance could have ruined a huge business deal, one that would decide the future for Daniel and his family. The goal wasn't just to confuse me. It was to plant a deep seed of fear and self-doubt in my mind. They wanted me to question myself, to believe my senility was not just a personal problem, but a danger to the future of the very children I loved. They wanted me to feel like such a burden that I would willingly give up control of my own life. From there, suggesting I go for a health checkup would no longer seem like an order, but a necessary solution to a problem they themselves had created. The most disgusting part was the legal action. They'd take me to a doctor who owed Kimberly a favor to get a forged assessment of cognitive decline, which would be the basis for my son to gain power of attorney over my assets. And the final act, cruel and swift, an immediate sale of my house, The house my husband and I had built with our own sweat and love, accepting a lowball offer to quickly pocket around $350,000. The ultimate goal was written in plain sight, with no attempt to hide it. Use the money to pay off credit card debt, buy a new SUV, and invest the rest. It was an obituary for my freedom, written by my own daughter-in-law. Reading those words, the scattered pieces from the past few months suddenly clicked into place perfectly. I started thinking back. Lately, their visits had become unusually frequent. The visits were no longer a source of joy, but disguised inspections. Kimberly, with a look of contempt and jealousy she barely bothered to hide, would constantly criticize my habits as old-fashioned or senile. She'd rearrange things in my kitchen and say, "This will make it easier for you to find things, Mom. You've been so forgetful lately." Daniel, my own son, would play right along with his wife. "Mom, are you sure you took your medicine? I called yesterday and you didn't pick up. I was so worried. Your health has been getting weaker, Mom. You need to be more careful." Their concern was over the top, turning care into a form of surveillance, turning questions into accusations about my age and decline. All of it wasn't concern, it was preparation. They were building a case, a narrative about a pitiful, senile old woman who needed to be saved from her own life. And I, in my innocence, had no idea I was the main character in a tragedy orchestrated by the people I loved most. I had to read it 3 times. The room suddenly felt suffocating, and the sound of my grandchildren's laughter seemed to echo from another world. The blood drained from my face, leaving a chill that went straight to my bones. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a death sentence for my independent life, written by my daughter-in-law, and likely with the complicity of my son. "Grandma, are you okay?" Sophie's voice pulled me back to reality. "Your face is all white." I tried to force a smile, but the muscles in my face felt frozen stiff. "I'm fine, sweetie. Grandma's just a little tired from the drive." The pain of betrayal hit me then, sharp as a shard of broken glass, twisting in my heart. I had loved Kimberly like my own daughter. I had welcomed her into our family with open arms. I had overlooked her snide remarks and disrespectful glances for years, telling myself it was just a generational gap. And Daniel, my boy, the son I had raised by myself after my husband passed, the child I worked day and night for to give him a bright future. How could he just stand by and let this happen? In that moment, I wanted to scream, to throw the iPad against the wall, to call them and confront them. But then another feeling, something much colder and stronger, rose from the depths of my soul. It was resolve. I was a history teacher for 40 years. I taught about fallen empires, about wars won not by strength, but by strategy. I had seen dictators toppled by carefully calculated plans. I would not scream. I would not cry. I would not show them my weakness. I would turn this pain into a weapon. With trembling fingers, I took pictures of the entire plan with my phone, emailed them to a backup account, and deleted the photos from my phone. I placed the iPad exactly where I had found it. I kissed my grandchildren goodbye, my heart heavy as lead. I drove away from that house feeling like I was fleeing the scene of a crime. The 3-hour drive from Raleigh back to my little home was like a journey through hell. The tears finally came, not tears of weakness, but of pure rage and bitter disappointment. I cried for my late husband, who had dreamed of this seaside house with me. I cried for the innocent little boy my son once was, now a spineless accomplice. And I cried for myself, for the trust that had been so cruelly stomped on. I thought the whole way home, why would they do this? What did I do to make them want me gone, just so they could sell off the house my husband and I worked so hard for? The thoughts swirled in my head, and then a faint memory surfaced. A few months ago, Daniel had been all excited about a sure-thing investment, some cryptocurrency project he swore would be a life changer. He had sunk almost all their savings into it.
Then he never mentioned it again. And I noticed the financial stress weighing on him, the whispered arguments with Kimberly when they thought I couldn't hear. It hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just greed, it was the desperation of a man who had failed. And Kimberly, that sly fox, she must have known. She wasn't just the planner, she held the strings, using her husband's shameful failure as a weapon to force him to comply. Danville's silence wasn't just complicity, it was the surrender of a man who had been stripped of his pride. And Kimberly, my daughter-in-law. I remembered the story she told of her poor childhood, her obsession with escaping that past. I had once felt sympathy for her, but now I saw it was the root of a sick and twisted greed. My house, in her eyes, wasn't a home filled with memories. It was a status symbol, a symbol of the security she never had. She was jealous of my independence, of the life I had built for myself. The contempt in her eyes whenever she looked at me, I understood it now. It was the resentment of someone who always felt second best. She didn't just want my money, she wanted to destroy my world, the world she craved but could never belong to, so she could build her own empire on its ashes. But as the tears dried, all that was left was a terrifying clarity. They had written a script for me, casting me in the role of a pathetic, senile old woman. Fine. If they wanted a play, I would give them a play. But I would be the director. The second I got home, the first thing I did was call Samuel O'Malley. Sam wasn't just my lawyer. He was my late husband's best friend, a man of integrity and someone I could trust with my life. "Judy, what's wrong? You sound strange," Sam asked the moment he picked up. "It's worse than strange, Sam," I replied, my voice now eerily calm. "I've just seen the wonderful future my beloved children have planned for me. I need your help." I sent Sam the pictures of the plan. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then I heard him swear, something he rarely ever did. "The bastards," he growled. "Judy, what do you want me to do? A restraining order? A lawsuit? We have enough to bury them." "Not yet, Sam, not yet," I said. "I want to set a trap, a perfect trap. I want them to walk right into it and expose their true colors themselves." And that is when the curtain truly began to rise on my play. The next day, I drove to my house in the Outer Banks. This wasn't a trip for peace and quiet. It was a mission to prepare the battlefield. The little cottage stood there, silent in the morning sun. Its cream-colored walls my husband and I had painted ourselves, the bougainvillea trellis I tended for 20 years. Every inch of this land, every brick was soaked in my sweat, my tears, and my love. It was the symbol of my independence after my husband died, proof that a woman could build her own empire, and I would not let anyone take it from me. On Sam's advice, I hired a security expert. He was an ex-military man, discreet and efficient. Under my direction, he installed a state-of-the-art camera and audio recording system. They were tiny, undetectable, hidden in smoke detectors, in the old grandfather clock my husband left me, in electrical outlets, and even in a potted fern on the porch. My home was now a stage, monitored from every single angle. Before I left, I took the final step in my preparations. I knew Kimberly, with her greedy nature, wouldn't be able to resist anything of value. I went to a pawn shop and bought a gold-plated watch and a fake diamond ring that looked just like the real heirlooms my husband and mother had left me. I placed them in an old velvet box and left it casually on my bedroom dresser, a tasty piece of bait for a greedy fish. The real items, of course, were resting safely in a bank vault, along with the deed to my house. Everything was ready. All I had to do was wait for my actors to step onto the stage. And then, right on schedule according to their script, the call came on a Tuesday evening. It was Daniel.
"Mom," he began, his voice a little hesitant, like a child trying to ask for a favor. "We were talking about Thanksgiving, and Kimberly had a wonderful idea. Our place in Raleigh is a bit cramped, and the kids are always talking about going to the beach. What if the whole family came to your place in the Outer Banks this year?" I could hear Kimberly whispering, urging him on in the background. Daniel continued, his voice more confident now. "It would be so much fun, Mom. My in-laws will come too. The kids can run around, and the adults will have plenty of space. What do you think?" They were serving me their own bait on a silver platter. This was phase 1, establish presence from their plan. I took a breath, pushed down the contempt rising in my throat, and put on the voice of an old mother overjoyed to the point of tears. "Oh, Daniel, really?" I chirped, a perfect performance of fake excitement. "That is a wonderful idea. Of course you can. I've always wished for the house to be full and lively like that. You all just treat it like your own home. I'll get everything cleaned up and ready for everyone." The relieved silence on the other end of the line told me they had completely bought it. The fish had taken the bait. They had no idea that the hunter had been waiting for this moment for a very, very long time. And then the fateful day arrived. Early Friday morning, a week before Thanksgiving, I began my final drive to the Outer Banks. This time, I wasn't bringing cookies. I was bringing a script in my head and a heart as cold as ice. I knew they would arrive earlier than planned to prepare for their little scheme. As my car turned onto the road leading to my house, I saw exactly what I had expected. 2 strange cars were parked messily in the driveway. Loud, thumping music blared from the living room, drowning out the gentle sound of the waves. I saw unfamiliar children running across the lawn I meticulously mowed every week, trampling my chrysanthemum beds. I slowly walked up the familiar wooden steps, each footfall a note in the symphony of revenge I was composing. The front door was wide open, and there stood Kimberly, like a queen guarding her newly conquered territory. She was wearing one of my favorite aprons, one I had embroidered myself 10 years ago. Her face first showed a flicker of surprise, which quickly morphed into a fake smile, one so sickening.
"Mother Miller, I didn't think you'd be here so soon," she began, her voice soft but loaded with insinuation. "I thought Dan told you we'd be coming early to get ready for Thanksgiving. You must have forgotten. Besides, I think you've mixed up the dates. We were expecting you next week, remember? We have a very important meeting with Dad's business partners today, and all of my family is here to help Daniel." The words were exactly as I'd expected, the first poisoned needle, aimed squarely at my role as the forgetful old woman. I made my voice tremble just enough. "Kimberly, I didn't know you were all here. I thought everyone was coming for Thanksgiving, so I came to clean up a bit." Just then, another woman, Kimberly's sister Brenda, walked out from inside. She looked me up and down with a critical eye, then turned to Kimberly, speaking just loud enough for me to hear. "Wow, it's getting crowded. The house is big, but with our whole family, it's just about full. I don't know if we have enough food stocked for the whole week with another person here." I ignored the jab, looking straight at Kimberly, my voice a little firmer. "This is my house. Of course I have a right to be here." The smile on Kimberly's face faded, replaced by an undisguised look of annoyance. Of course you do, she replied, her voice sharp. But Dan also told me we could use the house whenever we wanted. He wants us to think of this place as our own. And right now, our house has important guests arriving any minute, and I think you should leave so we have the proper space to welcome them. They probably wouldn't appreciate a spare person hanging around. Even though I knew the plan, her words felt like needles in my heart. The pain was real. I was an outsider in my own family, a stain they needed to hide. Then she continued, "Or how about this? If you really want to stay this week, we can make arrangements. You could pay for a portion of the living expenses and stay in your room when the guests are here. Think of it as your contribution to the big family vacation. How about that?" Pay? Kimberly, the only ones who should be paying here are you, paying me back for disturbing the peace of this house. The ones who need to leave are you, not me. Kimberly's face darkened. Just then, a voice called from inside. "Kim, the oven's acting up again. Can you come take a look?" She shot a glare inward, then turned to Brenda, her voice a malicious whisper. "Deal with her. Be nice, be whatever. Just get her out of here before I get back."
Kimberly went inside. I stood my ground, refusing to budge, ignoring Brenda's snide remarks. A few minutes later, Kimberly returned, wiping her hands on my apron. She froze when she saw me still standing there, my back straight, my gaze unwavering. Her plan had hit an unexpected snag. My defiance, right in front of her family, lit the fuse on the anger she had been trying to suppress. Her calm facade shattered. Her face turned red, contorted with rage. She looked straight at me, then glanced at the crowd of her relatives who were now watching with curiosity. She needed to assert her power, to crush my resistance publicly. She took a deep breath, and then she screamed, her voice shrill and venomous, echoing across the peaceful shore. "Why is that old Leech here? There's no room for her in this house." The words hit like a physical slap. I could feel all eyes on me, judging, mocking. A wave of anger and humiliation rose in my throat. I put on the performance of a lifetime. My eyes widened in shock and hurt. My hand holding my keys began to tremble convincingly. I took a step back as if struck by an invisible blow. I looked deep into the house, searching for my son. And there Dan stood, behind his wife, avoiding my gaze. His silence hurt more than 1,000 of Kimberly's insults. After looking at Dan several times, only to have him continue to avoid my eyes, I turned away. My shoulders slumped, and every step felt as heavy as if I were carrying the weight of the world. I walked away like a defeated soldier, an old mother cast out by her own children. But in my mind, a cold voice whispered, "Good acting, Judy. Act 1 is a perfect success. Now let the main characters have their stage." I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away without a single look back. The play had officially begun. The car rolled away from that familiar road, carrying the image of me as a withered leaf swept away by the wind. But beneath the shell of a pitiful victim, a patient hunter was watching. I didn't go far. I drove to a small roadside motel about 15 minutes from my house, a place close enough to monitor, but far enough to remain unseen. The room smelled of damp and old carpets, a stark contrast to the fresh, salty sea air I was used to. But for now, it was my command center. It was where I would pull the strings of my net.
A good hunter never chases his prey. He sets a trap and waits patiently. My trap was woven with modern technology and the foolishness of greed. The moment I checked in, I opened my laptop. With a few clicks, I accessed the security camera system I had secretly installed. My computer screen split into 4 small windows, each a live feed from a different angle of my own home. The living room, the study, my bedroom, and the porch. I could see and hear everything. I began my performance. I picked up my phone, took a deep, shaky breath, and called Daniel. It rang 3 times before he answered. "Hello?" His voice was tinged with annoyance. "Dan, it's Mom," I began, letting the hurt seep into every word. I don't understand. Why would Kimberly—" "Mom," he cut me off, his tone impatient. "I'm busy right now. The important client for our project has arrived. We planned this holiday meticulously. Kim was probably just a little stressed. She didn't want any mistakes during the party, so she might have been a bit harsh. Just find a hotel to stay in for now. We'll talk tomorrow." "But it's my house, Daniel," I sobbed, a performance any Oscar-winning actress would envy. "I know, but you also know how forgetful you've been. I told you before that I was borrowing the house to host an important client. You showing up unannounced has messed with our plans. When we get back, I'm going to take you for a health checkup. I'm worried about you living like this. Look, I have to go." He hung up before I could say another word. Forgetful, worried about my health. The words rang in my ears, so shameless and false. They had never told me about this. If I hadn't seen Kim's plan on the tablet, they probably never would have. Hosting an important client, but only inviting her side of the family, while I, the owner of the house, was kicked to the curb. And then blaming my forgetfulness. What a brilliant plan. On my laptop screen, I saw him hang up the phone and turn to Kimberly with an uneasy look. Kimberly crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. "Is it done?" she asked. Don't let her ruin our holiday or upset our important guest. They kept going on and on about this important guest, but throughout my surveillance, I never saw anyone show up besides their greedy, vain relatives. The important client was probably just an excuse for them to have a free-for-all in my home. How disgusting. For the next few days, I lived like a ghost, existing within the 4 walls of that motel room, my eyes glued to my laptop screen. I watched as my home, the place that held my soul and my memories, was brutally violated. Kimberly's family, including her sister Brenda and their parents, lived in my house like kings and queens. They threw their muddy shoes on the sofa I had saved up for 6 months to buy. They used the bath towels I had hand-embroidered with my own name to wipe their feet. Their loud music drowned out the sound of the ocean, and their coarse laughter filled spaces that were once reserved for peace. Through my invisible eyes, I gathered my first piece of evidence: contempt. On Saturday evening, the living room camera recorded Kimberly and Brenda drinking wine on my sofa. "I can't believe she had the nerve to show up," Kimberly said, taking a sip of wine, "as if this place actually belongs to her." "But legally it does, right?" Brenda asked, sounding a bit hesitant. "Only for now, honey," Kimberly sneered, a smile I knew all too well. "Once the court makes its ruling, things will be different. What does a senile old woman need a big house like this for anyway? It's a waste. She belongs in a nursing home where someone can look after her. We're doing her a favor, really." "A favor?" I whispered to the computer screen, a cold chill running down my spine. They were deluding themselves with their own lies, turning a hostile takeover into an act of charity. The most crucial piece of evidence came on Sunday afternoon. The camera in my late husband's study, where I had intentionally left some old papers, captured the fateful conversation. Daniel and Kimberly entered the room, apparently looking for something. "I can't find the original deed to the house anywhere," Dan said, his voice laced with anxiety as he rummaged through the drawers. "It's fine. We don't need it just yet," Kimberly replied calmly, holding a thick file. "What we need right now is this." She spread the papers out on the desk. The camera zoomed in, and I could clearly read the formally typed title: Petition to the Court to Declare Incapacitation and Appoint a Legal Guardian. Kimberly explained it all with the precision of a lawyer advising a client. This is the petition for the court. By law, if a person is no longer sound of mind to make their own decisions, a relative has the right to ask the court to appoint a legal guardian. That guardian will have full control over the incapacitated person's assets. All you have to do is sign here as her only son. She pointed to a blank line. Attached to this petition, she flipped to the next page, is the mental health evaluation from Dr. Evans confirming she shows signs of severe cognitive decline. With these two documents, the court will accept the case. I'll request a private and expedited hearing citing emergency health concerns. She won't even know what's happening. Daniel hesitated. I could see the conflict on his face. Kim, this is more than just signing a paper. We're lying to the court. This is perjury. What if Mom finds out and hires a lawyer? That's when Kimberly lost her patience. She moved closer, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder, her voice a mix of coddling and threat. Stop being so weak, Dan. Who's going to believe her by then? Once the court has a ruling based on a doctor's evaluation, anything she says will just be dismissed as a symptom of her senility. Who do you think we're doing this for? For me? No, it's for our children's future. Liam needs to go to private school. Sophie needs piano lessons. We are drowning in debt, and you know exactly whose fault it is that I had to even consider this path. Do you want our kids to grow up wanting, or do you want to give them a better life? Your mother has lived long enough. It's time for her to step back and let us take care of things. This isn't stealing. It's a sensible rearrangement of family assets. Sign it, Daniel. Be a man. Be a responsible father for once. Her words were like poisoned needles, jabbing right at my son's insecurity and pride. I saw Daniel close his eyes and let out a long breath. He picked up the pen. My son's pen glided across the paper, signing the document that would legally begin the process of stripping me of everything. My heart shattered, but my mind was terrifyingly cold. I had what I needed, irrefutable proof of an organized conspiracy to commit fraud. And Kimberly did not disappoint me. On Monday night, after everyone was drunk from a loud barbecue, the camera in my bedroom captured the moment I had been waiting for. Kimberly snuck into the room alone. She probably thought that I, a forgetful old woman, would hide important papers or cash somewhere. She rummaged through my dresser drawers, flipped over the mattress. Finding nothing, she looked disappointed. But then her eyes lit up when she saw the old velvet box on my dresser. She crept over, her steps as soft as a cat's. She opened the box. The bedroom light glinted off the fake gold watch and the fake diamond ring, creating an alluring sparkle. I could see the greedy smile spread across her face. She couldn't resist. She tried the ring on her finger, holding it up to admire it, turning it this way and that. She smiled at her reflection in the mirror, the smile of a victor admiring her spoils. After a moment, she carefully took off the ring and, along with the watch, slipped them into a small pouch in her handbag. She closed the empty box and put it back in its place. She thought no one knew. She thought she could later blame a cleaner or simply claim that I had lost them in a senile fit. She had no idea that her every move, from the moment she opened the box to her smug smile in the mirror, was being recorded in crystal clear 4K resolution. I sat in that musty motel room, replaying the video over and over. I didn't feel angry anymore, just a cold disgust and a bitter satisfaction. The prey had taken the bait, the trap had sprung. I now had everything, proof of a premeditated fraudulent conspiracy, proof of my son's complicity, and undeniable proof of theft. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, Sam. Sam, I said, my voice no longer holding a trace of a tremor, only the certainty of steel. We have enough. Send the invitation. After a week of patiently waiting in that motel room, fueled by coffee and righteous anger, I finally had all the threads I needed to weave my noose. Now it was time to pull it tight. Following my instructions, my lawyer Sam drafted a letter. It wasn't a threatening or legalistic letter. On the contrary, it was written in a formal and somewhat deferential tone. The letter invited Daniel and Kimberly to his office the following Friday morning to discuss and finalize the peaceful transfer of assets in accordance with Mrs. Miller's final wishes to ensure family harmony. The phrases final wishes and family harmony were the bait. It would plant the idea in their heads that I, the weak and pitiful old mother, had finally accepted my fate, that I had surrendered to their concerns. They would think I was too tired to fight and just wanted it all to be over with. Just as I predicted, Kimberly called Sam's office that very day. Her voice, as Sam later told me, was dripping with triumph. They had taken the bait. On Friday morning, I arrived at Sam's office an hour early. I was no longer the old woman in a worn-out nightgown in a motel room. I had chosen my best outfit, a classic but timeless charcoal gray suit. My hair was tied in a neat bun, and I wore light makeup. I wanted them to see me not as a victim, but as a dignified, lucid, and powerful woman. I wanted that to be the last image of me in their minds before their world collapsed. The conference room at Sam's office was large, with a long mahogany table and leather-bound chairs. One wall was lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with thick law books. The opposite wall, which Dan and Kim would be facing, featured a large, dark television screen. Everything was set perfectly. I sat at the head of the table, next to Sam, my back straight, my hands folded neatly in front of me. We didn't say much, just exchanged a knowing nod. The silence in the room was heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. At 10 o'clock sharp, the door opened. Daniel and Kimberly walked in.
They looked like a couple who had just won the lottery. Kimberly was wearing a designer business dress, striding in confidently with a smile she was trying and failing to suppress. Daniel followed behind, a bit more awkwardly, but the relief on his face was obvious. They thought their final burden was about to be lifted. "Hi, Mom," Daniel said, avoiding my eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller," Kimberly said, her voice as sweet as honey, her eyes gleaming with victory. "It's so good that we can finally resolve everything as a family." "Please have a seat," Sam said, his voice flat and emotionless, gesturing to the two chairs facing the screen. Once they were settled, Kimberly couldn't wait. She placed her expensive handbag on the table and launched right in, her voice full of feigned concern. "Mr. O'Malley and Mom, we were so glad to get your letter. Honestly, we've been so worried, especially after what happened at the Outer Banks over Thanksgiving. You being so confused and showing up unannounced like that, it really frightened us." She placed a hand on Daniel's, playing the part of the dutiful wife and daughter-in-law. "We were planning to talk to you about getting a general health checkup, but we just couldn't find the right time. When we got your letter, we thought maybe you yourself felt that your health isn't what it used to be, and you wanted us to help carry the load. Please don't worry. We're here for you, ready to take care of you. It's our responsibility." Daniel, encouraged by his wife, nodded in agreement. "That's right, Mom. We just want you to be safe and enjoy your retirement." Their shameless lies echoed in the room. They were painting a touching story of devoted children, and I was the frail, pitiful old mother who had accepted her fate. I let them finish, then gave a small smile, a smile that held no warmth. "You mentioned Thanksgiving at the Outer Banks, the part where I was confused and showed up unannounced?" Kimberly nodded, her face a mask of sympathy. "Yes, but don't you worry about it." "Well, that's strange," I interrupted, my voice now as cold and sharp as a razor's edge. "Because I remember very clearly, on the evening of Tuesday, November 14th, Daniel called me." The confidence on their faces faltered. I signaled to Sam. He said nothing, simply picked up a remote control and pressed a button. It wasn't a video, it was just audio. My own son's voice filled the room, cheerful and excited. "What if the whole family came to your place in the Outer Banks this year? It would be so much fun, Mom." The recording ended. Kimberly and Daniel stared at each other, their eyes wide with horror. How do you have that?" Daniel stammered.
I arrived just as you invited me, I continued, giving them no time to recover. And I also arrived just as you planned, didn't I? The Outer Banks house plan that Kimberly detailed so meticulously on her iPad? That's when they realized this wasn't a handover. It was a trial. What are you talking about? Kimberly shot back, her voice high-pitched as panic began to overwhelm her confidence. We were just worried about you. You have everything, a huge house just sitting empty. Meanwhile, we're... Her voice broke, and a torrent of desperation and bitterness burst forth. Do you have any idea how much debt we're in? Do you know we lost all our savings because of one of Daniel's stupid mistakes? You just sit there in your comfortable little bubble while we're facing the risk of losing everything. The words hung in the air. The ugly truth they had tried to hide was finally exposed, not as a confession, but as an accusation. I looked at them, not with anger, but with a deep, profound sadness. Struggling? In debt? I repeated, my voice low. I turned to Daniel, who was now staring at the floor. Daniel, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you just come to me and tell me you made a mistake? I waited, but he remained silent. I raised you. I worked my fingers to the bone to give you a future. Did you think that if you confessed, I would turn my back on you? My voice trembled with pain. I would have helped you with everything I have. I paused, letting the words sink into their guilty silence. Then my voice turned to ice, stripped of all warmth. But instead of asking for help, you chose to deceive. Instead of the truth, you chose a plan, a disgusting plan. I looked at them both. I have never been anything but good to you. This home was always open to you. And what did I get in return? A cruel conspiracy to strip me of everything I own, to have me declared mentally incompetent before the law. The contempt in my voice was unmistakable. You say you're struggling, but you seemed more than ready to host guests. I motioned to Sam. Let me show you your important guests. Sam pressed the button again. The large screen behind them flickered to life. The scene of my violated home appeared. The thumping music, the rude strangers laughing, and then the damning conversation in the living room between Kimberly and her sister. What does a senile old woman need a big house like this for anyway? It's a waste. We're doing her a favor, really. Kimberly's jaw dropped, her face ashen. But that wasn't all. The screen cut to the study, replaying the entire plot to defraud the court, displaying the petition to the court to declare incapacitation, and Daniel's own signature. Daniel dropped his head to the table, burying it in his hands as if to escape reality. Finally, the last turn of the screw. The screen showed my bedroom. It showed Kimberly sneaking in, rummaging through my things, and pocketing the fake jewelry with a triumphant smile. Close up, crystal clear, undeniable. That's when Kimberly completely fell apart. Her desperation turned to rage. She shot up from her chair, pointing a finger at me. You set us up. You spied on us with hidden cameras. This is illegal. She spun around and screamed at her husband. I told you she wasn't that stupid. This is all your fault. You're so weak. Their true faces, built on a foundation of greed and lies, had finally crumbled under the bright light of truth. It was then that Sam O'Malley spoke, his voice as cold as a winter morning, each word a hammer blow on their coffin. Mrs. Miller, all devices were installed by the legal property owner on her own property for security purposes. It is perfectly legal. And all of this footage, along with the fraudulent petition you both signed, is admissible as evidence in a court of law. He put a heavy emphasis on the words court of law. The silence in the room was as heavy as lead. The only sound was Sam rustling papers. Daniel's shoulders were shaking as he sobbed into his hands. Kimberly sat frozen, her face a mess of tears and mascara. Her eyes locked on the file Sam had just pushed towards them as if it were a venomous snake. They had seen the trap. They had seen themselves cornered. Now they would see the price of their freedom. Option 2, Sam continued, his voice still flat and emotionless, is an agreement. An agreement that Mrs. Miller, in a final act of grace, is offering to spare her grandchildren the shame of having their parents caught up in the legal system. Kimberly looked up, a flicker of hope in her desperate eyes. "What agreement?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. I remained standing, my arms crossed, watching in silence. This was Sam's moment. He was the embodiment of my justice. "The agreement has 3 parts," Sam explained, holding up 3 fingers. "Legal, financial, and personal. You must accept all of them. There is no negotiation." He opened the file to the first page. Part 1, Legal. You will both sign a detailed confession of the entire conspiracy, from the initial planning to the act of theft. This confession will be notarized and kept in my office. It will not be submitted to the court unless you violate any other term of this agreement. Second, you will immediately sign documents rescinding all paperwork related to the transfer of assets. Third, you will reimburse Mrs. Miller for all legal fees and the cost of the security system installation. An itemized invoice is attached. I saw Kimberly's eyes dart to the invoice, and they widened even further. The price of their stupidity was not cheap. Part 2, Financial, Sam continued, turning the page. This is the important part. Mrs. Miller does not want your money, but she wants to secure her grandchildren's future, a future untainted by their parents' mistakes. He paused, looking directly at Daniel. A sum of money equal to the appraised value of the Outer Banks house, $350,000, will be transferred from your joint assets. This money will be used to establish a trust fund in the names of Liam and Sophie Miller. The trust will be managed by Mrs. Miller and myself as trustees. The funds will be used for the children's education and to help them start their lives when they turn 18. You will have no access to or control over this fund whatsoever. In other words, you have permanently forfeited any inheritance of that house, and it will instead pass directly to the next generation. Daniel's sobs grew louder. It was a devastating blow to his pride and his financial future. The house he had tried to steal was now forever beyond his reach, a permanent reminder of his betrayal. And finally, Sam said, his voice hardening slightly, Part 3, Personal. This is the clause that cannot be measured in money, but it is the most important one to Mrs. Miller. He looked at me, and I gave a slight nod for him to proceed. You will each, individually, write a letter of apology by hand, not a generic apology. The letter must detail every single one of your wrongdoings, from the planning, the humiliation of Mrs. Miller, the deceit, to the theft. It must show genuine remorse. After they are written, on a day of Mrs. Miller's choosing, you will both come to the Outer Banks house. You will stand before her with no lawyers and no one else present, and you will read those letters aloud. After that, Sam concluded, you will never be permitted to set foot on that property again unless you have explicit written permission from Mrs. Miller. The future of your relationship with Mrs. Miller will be determined by her and her alone. He closed the file. You have 1 hour to review and sign. If we do not have your signatures in 1 hour, I will personally drive this evidence to the district attorney's office. Sam and I stood up and walked out of the conference room together, leaving the 2 culprits with their sentence. We went into Sam's private office and closed the door. I sank into the sofa, and for the first time in 3 weeks, a wave of complete exhaustion washed over me. The weight I had been carrying was finally off my shoulders. You did well, Judy, Sam said, pouring me a glass of water. You were very strong. I just did what had to be done, Sam, I replied, my voice a bit raspy. I find no joy in their downfall, only sadness. Sadness for the son I have lost. We sat in silence. 45 minutes passed. Then there was a knock on the door. Sam's secretary stepped in. Mr. O'Malley, they've signed. We returned to the conference room. The file lay in the middle of the table, 2 messy signatures on the final page. Daniel and Kimberly stood there, looking like ghosts of their former selves. The smugness was gone, replaced by an empty, defeated hollow. They didn't look at me. They quietly gathered their things and left the room like 2 phantoms. As they passed me, I could hear Kimberly whisper to Daniel, her voice full of hate. "This is all your fault, you weakling!" Their relationship, built on greed and lies, was already beginning to fracture under the weight of blame. That was a part of the sentence I didn't need to write down. When the door closed behind them, I sat down in the chair Daniel had just vacated. It was over. The play had ended. Justice, in its own way, had been served. I hadn't just won back my house. I had protected its soul. I had taught them a lesson that money could never buy. But the victory tasted bitter. I had won the battle, but I had lost a family. On the drive back, I didn't go to my small home. I drove straight to the Outer Banks. I needed to go back to where it all began. When I opened the door to the house, a familiar sense of peace welcomed me. The smell of pine and salt. The sound of the waves whispering just outside. The house was still standing, sturdy and forgiving, as if nothing had ever happened. I walked through the rooms. Traces of the invaders were still there. A few empty beer cans left under the sofa. The faint scent of Kimberly's cheap perfume still lingered in my bedroom. I opened every window, letting the fresh sea breeze rush in, to sweep away everything that was tainted. I would clean. I would cleanse this house. I would make it my sanctuary once again. That evening, I sat alone on the porch, in the wicker chair my husband and I had picked out together. The sky was full of stars, and the moon hung over the glittering sea. I had lost my son, perhaps for good. But as I breathed in the clean air, feeling the solidness of the house around me, I realized something. I was not alone. I had myself, and for the first time in a long time, that was more than enough. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet after the storm, the price paid for bad choices, and the peace you find when you finally cleaned your own house, both literally and figuratively. The weeks following that confrontation at the lawyer's office passed in a strange sort of quiet. The house in the Outer Banks, after being thoroughly cleansed by myself and a team of professional cleaners, was itself again. The smell of pine and salt had replaced the cheap perfume. The sound of waves had replaced the thumping music. I spent my time there, personally rearranging every item, polishing every corner, as a ritual to reclaim my space and erase the tainted memories. Meanwhile, in Raleigh, the sentence I had handed down was taking effect. Sam informed me that Daniel and Kimberly had sold their new SUV and withdrawn a large sum from their savings to come up with the $350,000 for the children's trust fund. I could only imagine their bitterness as they had to give up those symbols of their fake success to pay the price for their greed. A month later, I got a call from Sam. "Judy, they sent the letters, both of them." "Have you read them?" I asked. "I have. They're detailed, and they sound sincere. At least Daniel's does," he replied. I set a date, the following Saturday. I wanted it to be over. On that day, the sky over the Outer Banks was gray, and a light wind was blowing. I sat in my usual wicker chair on the porch, a cup of hot ginger tea on the small table beside me. I didn't invite them into the house. The porch was enough. It was the boundary line between my world and theirs. At 2 o'clock sharp, Daniel's old, modest sedan pulled into the driveway. It wasn't the shiny SUV from before. Daniel and Kimberly got out. They looked worn down. Daniel was thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. Kimberly, who had always been so perfectly put together, was dressed simply, with no makeup and her hair pulled back in a hasty bun. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a tired resignation. They walked up the steps and stood before me, about 6 feet away, like 2 school children about to be disciplined. They couldn't meet my eyes. "Begin," I said, my voice calm and void of emotion. Daniel took a deep, shaky breath, the letter trembling in his hands. He began to read. His voice was hoarse and broken. "Mom," he started, "I am writing this letter not to ask for forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it. I am writing to confess. I confess that I was weak. I let my pride and financial pressure cloud my judgment. I confess that I stood by silently while you were humiliated, and that my silence was an act of cowardice. I confess that I signed those papers, knowing they were a lie, and that they would hurt you. I chose money over you. I broke your trust. I failed as a son. I am sorry, Mom. I am so sorry, Mom." When he finished, he broke down, tears streaming down his face.
It was Kimberly's turn. Her voice was small and trembling, a stark contrast to its usual shrillness. She read her letter, confessing to the plan, to the contempt she had for me, to the greed that had blinded her, and to the theft. "I was wrong," she finished. "I was wrong about everything. I underestimated you, and I have destroyed my family." When they were both done, silence fell. There was only the sound of the wind and the sea. They stood there, waiting, perhaps for a scolding, for a word of forgiveness, for anything. I looked at them in silence for a long moment. I looked at the tear-stained face of my son, the child I once held in my arms. I looked at the woman who had caused all this pain. And in that moment, I didn't feel hate, only a profound sadness and an emptiness. Finally, I spoke, my voice soft but firm. "You can go now." They looked up, surprised. It wasn't the reaction they had expected. "It's done," I continued. "Go home and try to be good parents to Liam and Sophie. That's the only thing you can do now." They said nothing more. They turned, trudged down the steps, and got into their car. The car rolled away, disappearing behind the pine trees. I sat there alone, looking out at the ocean. Their letters lay on the table, but I didn't bother to read them again. The words, whether sincere or not, could not mend what was broken. Wounds may heal, but scars remain. The play was well and truly over. I hadn't just won back my house. I had won back my self-respect. I had proven that a senile old woman could also be a master strategist, that silence did not mean weakness, and that justice sometimes comes not from a courtroom, but from a well-laid plan. 6 months later, as the autumn winds began to blow in from the Atlantic, I was sitting in my living room in the Outer Banks. The house was now completely my own, quiet and peaceful. But an external peace can't always calm the storm within. On the small table beside me, next to my steaming cup of tea, was a silver picture frame. In the photo, I was smiling brightly, my arms around my 2 young grandchildren, Liam and Sophie, during a beach trip a few years back. I picked up the frame, my finger gently tracing their smiling faces. A quiet sadness swelled in my chest. I had won. I had protected my home, my independence. But at what cost? I missed Liam's laughter, Sophie's unexpected hugs. The silence in this big house was, at times, terrifyingly heavy. I wasn't some cold-hearted machine of vengeance. I was a grandmother, and my heart ached for the innocent children caught in the middle of this war. Just then, my phone rang. It was Daniel. It was the first time he had called me since that fateful day at the lawyer's office. "Mom," he said, his voice hesitant, "it's Liam's birthday this weekend. He really misses you." I was silent for a moment, my eyes still on the picture frame. A mother's heart, a grandmother's heart, never stops loving, no matter how badly it's been wounded. "Tell him his grandma wishes him a very happy birthday," I replied, "and tell him I love him very much." Will you come?" he asked, his voice filled with a fragile hope. I looked out the window, where the chrysanthemums I had replanted were beginning to bloom, strong and resilient.
Forgiveness isn't an act, it's a process. And my process was just beginning. "I'm not ready, Daniel," I said, gently but firmly. "Maybe someday, but not now." After I hung up, I didn't feel sad. I felt free. Free to choose, free to heal on my own terms. I lived my days in peace. I tended my garden. I read books. I took long walks on the beach. Every now and then, Sam and his wife would come to visit. We'd drink tea, talk about the old days, and never once mention Daniel or Kimberly. My house was filled with laughter again, but it was the laughter of friendship, of respect. I didn't lose a house. I just cleaned it out. Cleaned out the things that no longer belonged. And in that quiet, I found my peace. It was an expensive peace, bought with tears and heartbreak. But it was all mine. And for a 72-year-old woman, peace and independence are the most precious legacy of all.